yellow, and these are probably a foot taller than these, just by the variety that you pick. I mean, it really is that simple to start with. And oh, by the way, how much do you pay extra for this? Anybody know? For a seed of a resistant bean? We had a 0 from the back. Nothing. You pay no extra money to get a bag of this seed versus a bag of this. It's the best deal in crop production. I hesitate to keep pointing that out. I don't want to give any seed companies an idea to start charging a premium, but it's just the culture. The cyst-resistant soybeans were developed in North Carolina, so we talked about how it showed up in North Carolina in '54. By 1958, breeders had started to develop resistant soybeans, and they never charged extra for them, and that's carried through the decades. So we're very blessed to this day to not be paying any more for a seed of this versus this. And to get results that work this well, I mean, it's pretty spectacular. What does that look like numerically? Well, I'd have to tell you, it pays you twice. You're going to make money twice with resistant soybeans. And the first payment comes in terms of yield. It's the one I'm guessing you thought of. So I do a big variety evaluation program in Iowa at 9 locations across the state. And we have about 60 different resistant beans in an experiment. And then we always have 3 or 4 susceptible soybeans. And I'm just showing you some typical results from East Central Iowa. Note the starting egg count. So this is kind of in the upper end of what I would consider low egg count, 1,300 eggs. And on average, the 60 different resistant beans yielded 52.7 bushels per acre, and the 4 widely grown susceptible soybeans yielded 46. So what is that? For 6.7, 6.8 bushels per acre. Money in your pocket. How much did you pay for this seed extra? Nothing. That is free profit. And that's the first payment. But the second payment I get even more excited about. This experiment started at the spring. We had an average of 1,300 eggs per 100 cc's of soil. Here are the ending egg counts under the resistant beans and under the susceptible soybeans. So the resistant beans that yielded 6.7 bushels per acre or more also ended up with 1/4 the eggs under the susceptible. And what is this going to do to the next soybean crop that's going to be grown? So resistance truly pays you twice. It pays you bushels per acre the year you grow it, and it pays you bushels per acre in terms of lower nematode numbers the next time you grow soybeans. And again, all for the low, low price of free. So the question is, should you blend resistant and susceptible? We struggled with that question, or we entertained that question in the 90s, and there were a few seed companies that offered blends. From strictly a nematode standpoint, no, not now, at least for Iowa. Now, I should know more about the state of resistant soybeans up here, but down in Iowa now, they're pretty darn high yielding, all of them. And so it's not like you're going to get much more yield by blending with a susceptible. I don't know if that's true up here or not, but what worries me about it is that you're allowing more reproduction. And you folks are in a unique position where if you catch it in a field and the numbers are low, you can keep low numbers low. The horse is already out of the barn in Iowa. It's so far out of the barn, it's not even funny. So you are in a unique situation where you can keep low numbers low if you catch it when those numbers are low. Now, a better reason for considering a blend is if you need some other defensive trait. So if your cyst-resistant bean isn't very good against Phytophthora, and you have a raging Phytophthora problem, you might want to blend with a susceptible soybean that gives you better Phytophthora protection. But from the SCN perspective alone, I think you're better off pure resistant. Good question. Well, I don't know how much you all know about resistant soybeans, resistant to soybean cyst nematode, but there's a bunch of different types. We call them sources of resistance, and the reason we call them sources is they're not single genes, they're actually 3 or 4 genes that are used in a breeding program, a soybean breeding program. So each source of resistance involves 4 or more genes, and what that means is, even though a bunch of varieties might list this as the source of resistance, there's no guarantee that they got all of the genes. Some may have only gotten 1 of the genes, or 2, or 3, or 4. So varieties with the same source of resistance still can give you variable results. Also, each source of resistance allows a low level of reproduction, so none of them are 100% effective. And if you're interested, the scientific definition of resistance is a variety that doesn't allow any more than 10% reproduction compared to a non-resistant or a susceptible soybean. So if a susceptible soybean you're normally growing allows 500 females to form on the roots, a resistant should only allow 50 females or less, because 50 is 10% of 500. That's kind of the scientific nerd's definition of resistance. So here's the current status of soybean varieties in Iowa. Probably this is a view into the future for you, more than the current status for you. Almost all cyst-resistant soybeans in Iowa, and probably in the whole Midwest, have that one source of resistance, PI 88788. Are you familiar with that word, PI 88788? Have you heard that? So you hear about it in the literature. So each year in Iowa, I put a list of resistant varieties together for Iowa farmers. I don't want to make you envious, but last year's list, there was 818 varieties on my list for Iowa. Just maturity groups 1, 2, and 3. But of that 818, 803 had 88788. So that underscores that probably everything you're going to have at your availability, in the short term at least, is going to be 88788 as well. Now, we've been growing 88788 for a couple of decades, so most of our SCN populations have built up on 88788. Because that's the only thing we've used to control it. It's almost like if you only used one herbicide to control your weeds all these years. Oh wait, what does that sound like? It's Roundup or glyphosate all over again. We're in the same boat, if you will, with soybean cyst nematode resistance. Now, surprisingly, we're still getting pretty good yields out of 88788 resistant soybeans. Even though we're seeing the nematode build up on them. But there's only one direction that's going to go. The yields are going to continue to decrease as the nematode builds up. And the best way I can describe that for my farmers is right here. It's a train wreck in slow motion. There's one direction that it's going, and that's off the cliff. So I don't know why everything coming out on the market has this source of resistance, but it does, and I don't want to turn you off on it. You're going to use it. If you have it available, use it, and just hope and pray that the companies start producing more varieties with other types of resistance, because I'll go back. There are others to pick from. They're just harder to get in high-yielding soybeans, and any soybean seed company is reluctant to breed anything that doesn't match up to their highest yielding non-resistant varieties. So any questions about resistance? Okay, reality number 4. That is, seed treatments are going to become of increasing importance as we move into the future, for you as well as for me. You're kind of getting 2 management options at a similar time. You're getting access to resistant soybeans and seed treatments at the same time, whereas down in Iowa we've had resistant soybeans for 20-some years, and the seed treatments have just started to come on board. So there's a bunch of them now. I don't know if you realize it, but in the late 2000s, Syngenta kind of opened the market. This was an untapped, never before existing market before, seed treatments that affect nematodes, and their product was called Victa. It initially was brought on the market for cotton and then moved to corn and soybeans. It was targeted against all plant parasitic nematodes, not just soybean cyst, but in the south there's something called root knot nematode, and there's a lesion nematode. So there are other plant pest nematodes that Avicta works against. It's a chemical, and it inhibits the nerve transmission of the nematode. And then there's a product out of Pennsylvania called Inhibit. It's another seed treatment that is labeled for all crops and all nematodes. It's a protein that the company says stimulates natural plant defenses, which is why it's supposed to work on all crops and against all nematodes. Bayer entered the market with a product called Votivo, and again, it was offered on cotton, corn, and soybean. It would work against all nematodes. It's a bacteria that is on the coating of the seed, and then it moves to the surface of the root, and somehow it repels nematodes from the roots. It doesn't kill the nematodes, but the nematodes wiggle up to the root and don't like how it smells or tastes or whatever, and they turn around and they go away. So it provides protection, but it doesn't kill the nematodes. The fourth option hit the market pretty broadly last year for the first time from Syngenta. It's a product called Chloriva, and it's very specific to soybean and soybean cyst nematode, and it is a bacterial parasite that kills the nematode. So this is the one and only natural enemy of a nematode that's ever made it to market as a commercial product. And I'll show you the very last few slides I have are some results of our research with that. And then one that's brand new, in fact, it just got labeled, I don't know if it was December or January of this year, and it's a product called Alivo from Bayer. Has anybody heard of it up here yet? It's a Bayer product targeted primarily at sudden death syndrome, but surprisingly it works also against soybean cyst nematode, and it inhibits some key enzyme. And so this one is really interesting. It's got a lot of us, our interest peaked, because there's never before been a seed treatment that targets two things that are so different. The sudden death syndrome is caused by a fungus that lives in the soil. Soybean cyst nematode is this microscopic worm that wiggles through the soil, and surprisingly, this product works against both, and I can tell you it does. I've seen it in the field last year against sudden death syndrome, and it was as close to black and white as I've ever seen. There were plants really getting walloped by SDS right next to plants of the same variety treated with that Alivo, and I've never seen such a big difference in Iowa with sudden death syndrome. And then we've tested it in a greenhouse against sudden soybean cyst nematode, and I've never seen a seed treatment lower soybean cyst numbers in the greenhouse. So we'll be testing it in the field this year for the first time. So I'm really optimistic about this, and we do have some somewhat promising results with Chloriva. So I guess my point is these really were nothing much to brag about or talk about, the early entries into the market, but we've got two that are really promising right now. Chloriva that you could buy today if you wanted, and you probably could buy Alivo from Bayer as well. So the last thing I wanted to do was show you some research we did in Iowa with the Iowa Soybean Association looking at Chloriva. Brandon, we've got 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay. So basically we wanted to see if Chloriva worked. Well, I don't know how much you know about seed treatments, but they keep adding on top. You can't just buy Chloriva. So when you buy Chloriva, it's called Chloriva Complete Beans, which means it's Chloriva plus Cruiser Max Advanced plus Vibrance, because it's all packaged together. So this is Syngenta's seed insecticide and fungicides, and then Chloriva Complete Beans is this exact same thing plus Chloriva. Has everybody got that? So to compare with and without Chloriva, the bacterial parasite, you have to compare this product name to this one, because that's just how they sell it. You'll never be able to buy just Chloriva. You'd have to buy Chloriva Complete Beans, which is Cruiser Max Advanced plus Vibrance plus Chloriva. We put it all on a moderately resistant Asgrow variety called 2433. So moderately resistant means it allowed between 10 and 30% reproduction. Remember I told you the scientific definition is less than 10% for resistant, 10 to 30% is moderately resistant. My program did 9 small plot experiments, and my small plot experiments were 4 rows wide by 17 feet long, and everything is replicated 12 times. So it's really small and really highly replicated. But we took this exact same seed treated with these, and the Iowa Soybean Association did 15 strip trials. And their strip trials are done by farmers like you with 12 to 24 row wide strips, 1,000 to 1,500 feet long, and 3 to 15 reps per tree. So we had a really cool setup where we did things really small and intensive and really field scale, but we all used exactly the same seed and seed treatment. So here's the locations. This is Iowa. The triangles are the strip trials, and they're scattered a lot in central Iowa and the northern part of the state. And then my 9 small plot experiments are pretty deliberately spaced out. So there's one here, here, and here, 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 and here, and then here, here, and here. So I try and go across the state. West, central, and east, in the northern tier, the center part of the state, and the southern part. So anyway, this was the mix of locations, and here are the results. Here's the yield results. So what we're looking at here is yield difference in bushels per acre. We took the average yield of Cloriva, complete beans, and subtracted from it the average yield of Cruiser, Max, Advance, plus Vibrance. So if a bar is pointing up above 0, that means that this yielded more than this. And these downward pointing bars means this yielded more than this. And lo and behold, you see this kind of graph a lot. If you look at data from industry or from universities, we saw a range of plus 4.6 bushels per acre benefit with Cloriva all the way down to minus 2.2 bushels per acre. And then if you want to put statistics on it, only the bars that have an asterisk were statistically significant. So the color pattern for the bars, the bright blue bars are my small plot experiments, and we had a full range of results. And then the dull green or greenish blue bars were the on-farm strip trials with the same variety. So this one, these, and then here. And then some of the farmers who did strip trials actually used a different variety. They still use the same seed treatments, but a different variety. And those results are scattered as well. So what does all that mean? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And my personal challenge is to figure out why it works when it does and why it doesn't when it doesn't, to help you make a better decision on whether or not you want to invest an extra $10 or $12 or $15 an acre to buy this seed treatment. At this point, this is all we know about the yield data. And the last thing, I'll give you a little smattering. For my small plot experiments, we also measured nematode numbers, and we found some interesting things there as well. But when we took all the yield results combined from all 9 my small plot experiments, it was pretty much a wash. So my highly replicated, really tiny plots, there was hardly anything different between Cloriva complete beans and the base Cruiser Max Advance plus Vibrance. But we did detect in my plots significant reductions in nematode numbers. And that's the first time we've ever seen that. And so that is a glimmer of hope. But unfortunately, the experiments, the locations that had significant yield increases didn't have the significantly lower reproduction. So those didn't match up. And nor did we get the biggest yield benefit in the fields that had the highest nematode numbers. So at this point, it's a real mixed bag. I think visually this sums it up the best. From plus 4.6 to minus 2.2 or 2.3 bushels per acre. And I can't give you any better guidance today as to where you'd fall on this graph. And that's kind of the challenge I personally assume, and I'm sharing with my colleagues to try and figure out what's the odds. Surely it's not a blind dart that you're throwing against that graph as far as where you're going to end up. Surely we should be able to figure out why these bars are upward pointing and why these bars are downward pointing. And so I think that is everything. Here's just a summary. two kinds of soybean farmers. Hopefully by now, everybody here is the same kind of soybean farmer. You're concerned about SCN. Understand that it's going to live longer than you, but you can manage it with resistant soybeans and seed treatments, and let's not forget alfalfa or corn or non-host crop. And with that, I'm happy to entertain questions, but only until Brandon gives me the hook and says it's time to move on. So, yes, sir.
Have you done the same trials with Votivo as you have done with Votivo?
Good question. Have we done the same trials with Votivo that we had done with Clarita? And the answer is yes. In the years 2011 and 2012, there was a group of us from 12 states in the Midwest, including North Dakota. This was funded by the North Central Soybean Research Program. So your checkoff dollars through the North Central Soybean Research Program. We looked at these three, all on the same variety, all planted the same across the region. We had a total of 62 experiments over those 2 years in those 12 states. And there was about 4 instances where yield was significantly increased out of 62. And the fact that the industry seems to be moving on, I didn't want to take up the time to show you all that data. I could get a half an hour talk on that project, but it's really disappointing because up until then I was thinking maybe I was doing something wrong because I didn't see much out of Votivo or Avicta or Inhibit, but we had 12 different people, including Sam Markell, test these things across 12 different states, and we can't all be incompetent. So we just picked up very little to speak of with these three. Actually, the Clarita results I just showed you are the most optimistic results I've obtained so far. And then, as I said, I'm really keen on, hopefully this will provide benefit in the field as well. But that's a very good question. Other questions? How are you feeling? I want you to raise your hand. Your opinion of farming, growing soybeans with soybean cyst nematode in North Dakota, you gotta have to pick. Are you more optimistic now, having heard what I had to say, unchanged, or are you more bummed out than you were before I started talking? So how many people, let's go to the opposite. How many people are more bummed out now than even before? Raise your hand. You can be honest. Well, that's good. How many people are unchanged? You kind of feel you're about the same. That's okay too. And then how many are more optimistic? Okay, I have to be honest with you. I appreciate your honesty. If it were me, I would have probably raised my hand for neutral. But there's no reason, I guess the last thing I want to say is, it's not a death sentence. I mean, we've been farming with it for 25 years in Iowa, and we're still in the soybean business. And you have a unique opportunity that you can catch it earlier if you get out there and scout and find it in fields where the numbers are low and keep it in check. It's easier to keep low numbers low than it is to drive high numbers back down. So look at it as an opportunity, not as a curse. Question? Difference in year, does that have an effect? That has the most effect of anything, is Mother Nature, the weather. The worst conditions environmentally for damage, you're going to suffer the most yield loss, is hot and dry. And we don't know why. The hot part, it's somewhat easy to say. Remember I mentioned these are cold-blooded animals, so the warmer it is, the quicker they do their life cycle. But we'll see tenfold increases in reproduction and tripling of damage in hot, dry years, and we just don't know why. So if you have a cool, wet year, I mean, generally that's a bummer if you're trying to grow crops, but that's the one silver lining of a cloudy cloud, is that the nematode won't do as well. It goes bonkers in hot, dry years, and it goes crazy in high pH soils is the other factor. And by high pH soils, I mean 7.5 to 8.0 or above. Those are the two factors that have a greater effect on the whole equation than anything else. Soil, hot, dry years, particularly soil moisture, and then soil pH. last chances for questions. Yes?
When do you recommend the soil sampling be done?
When do I recommend the soil sampling be done? Whenever you're willing to do it, do it. If you're willing to do it any time of the year, then I would recommend sampling in the fall preceding a soybean crop, so you know what you're facing for your next soybean crop. But there's no wrong time to sample other than when the ground is frozen or covered with snow. So I really wasn't joking. If the thought's passing through your mind, I could go do it now, but maybe I should wait to a better time. I've heard that too many times. I'd say go do it. You can sample in the spring, you can sample during the growing season, you can sample in the fall. We can get those cysts out of the soil no matter what time of the year it's collected. But the absolute best time, in my opinion, is in the fall, where you know you're going to grow soybeans in that field the next year, because you'll know what's waiting for you. Okay, well, it seems like we've run out of questions for now. I'll be here all evening, and so we can talk some more at dinner or afterwards as well. But I'll turn it over to Brandon.